And we're live. Okay. Hi, welcome to the 2018 OWAT guest seminar, our first one of this session with Tiana Clark. I'm so excited to have Tiana here today. Her writing is inspirational to me, but also award-winning, and it's going to be really exciting to navigate the very delicate but also tenuous spaces that we're gonna see through all the text you provided. For everyone who's watching right now, make sure you have the syllabus up as we're gonna do a lot of deep diving into that. If you wanna have either a open document on your computer or a piece of paper beside you, you're gonna do some writing today, so get those things ready. But I don't wanna take up too much time. It's Tiana's gonna just lead and guide this work. And so be receptive, be respectful, and toward the end, there's going to be some sort of a more general question section. So if you're watching live and are in this inside the stream, just leave your questions in the respective Facebook chats, and I will ask them for you. So I'll be the liaison for those watching the YouTube link, Tiana. Okay. But yeah, so for the rest of y'all here, we're going to do a quick round of introductions for everyone here live with us. Just name, pronouns, and what time zone you're in. That's pretty easy. Okay, so I'll start. My name is Jay. Pronouns they them, and I'm in Pacific Standard Time. Let's go. Yeah, who wants to start down here?
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Elizabeth. Pronouns are she, her, and I'm in Eastern Standard Time.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Natasha. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm in Central Time.
Hi, Natasha.
Hi.
Who's next?
I will go next. Hopefully you guys can hear me. My name is Tiana. Pronouns are she, her, or they, them, and I am in Pacific Standard Time.
Hi, Tiana.
Hello.
Next up. There's two more people here. Royal. Oh, next up. Is it frozen? There's two more people. Hello. Royal. Is it frozen?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Royal.
I think my... Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Whoa.
Oh, technology.
Okay. Royal, I'm going to eject you because you're not helping for some reason. Sorry. I'm going to bring you.
Was it Julie? Were you trying to talk?
Hi. I'm Julie. Pronouns she, her, in Pacific Standard Time.
Hi, Julie.
Hello.
Okay. Next, name, pronouns, and what time zone you're in. Marisha?
I didn't realize you guys could see or hear me.
Oh, yes, we can, both.
What's your name?
My name is Marisha Thomas.
And what time zone are you in?
Say it one more time.
What time zone are you in?
My time zone, Eastern Standard.
And pronouns?
She, her.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisha. Is that everybody?
Zoe? Zoe?
Real quick, I have to time out of the call. I am in many spaces at once, but I will try to come back.
Okay. Sounds good. We hope you come back.
I appreciate you guys.
Okay.
Is it Zoe or Zoe?
Hi, it's Zoe.
Hi, Zoe.
My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really bad at Google Hangouts, so sorry.
All good.
So am I.
Okay.
D. I see this person in D on the very end. Is D here with us?
A new person just popped up too.
Sally, yeah, Sally, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, we can't hear you.
No, you muted yourself. Unmute yourself. Nope. Still can't hear you. No sound. Nothing.
We can't hear you.
Okay. Well,
Do you think we're fine to get started?
yeah. Okay. We'll get started. Go for it. Thank you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you all for coming. My name is Tiana Clark. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm in Central Time Zone. I'm in Madison, Wisconsin. I've been traveling so much that I've kind of been like in this state of blurriness of what's happening. Where am I in the world? I just thank you all so much for your time. They told me to kind of stick to an hour, but it was okay if I went a little bit over. And since we're kind of starting a little bit late, I will probably go a little bit over. But if you have to jump off, I totally understand and I will not be offended. But I gave you all a lot of poetry juiciness and I want to get to as much of it as possible. And I was trying to think about the project I wanted to do and what I wanted to discuss today. And I don't know, I was really taken with this essay from Robin Cost Lewis, and I hope you all had a time to check it out, where she kind of talks about the voyage of the Sable Venus and kind of her journey with it. And I was really just kind of taken with this one paragraph. It's kind of towards the middle where she says, I don't know at what point it happened, but over the years, my project stopped being research. And I began to feel that although I lived in New York and although I was a mother with a 3-year-old son carrying 4 bags of groceries while hauling his stroller and him up 4 flights of stairs, mashing him bananas and avocados during the day, there remained nevertheless a very vast part of me that was leaving to serve on board a great ship. Only I could see. It just happened. One evening, as my son slept in his room, it felt to me as if a vast, ancient ship birthed itself in the middle of our block, right outside my window in the East Village on 9th Street. Long before Hurricane Sandy would wash into our lives, a year before someone's white sofa went drifting down our block at 2 a.m, I'd already seen our street transform into an ocean, and that ocean had a curious vessel that I knew had come only for me. The captain of the ship was the Sable Venus herself, and she gently demanded that I get on board. The voyage had just begun, 38,000 years ago. And so today, I want to welcome you all aboard to this great ship. And I think that ship for me represents kind of our flood subjects. Emily Dickinson talks about your flood subjects. And I think we all kind of have these passions that chase us and haunt us. And for Robin, in the book that came out that won the National Book Award, you know, she was haunted by this image of the Sable Venus. And so this research took her to all these places that she saw black bodies kind of broken or defaced and kind of on the periphery of this like art history. And it made me think so much about my journey to kind of the poetry canon, put canon in quotes, and how I didn't see myself in that narrative. And also just for this workshop, I mean, it's the title is, you know, the end of femme namelessness. But you can kind of put any kind of identity in there that you have felt maybe marginalized or put on the side or on the periphery. I also think it can be an emotional experience that you feel though hasn't been centered or you haven't felt seen. Can everyone just maybe raise your hand if you've kind of felt that in your own path? Like, have you felt kind of like you haven't seen your own story reflected in the poems that you, like when you first started reading poetry? Okay, I see a couple hands. Okay. Yeah, I feel like that's kind of a common experience if you don't kind of see yourself reflected back on the page. And so to me, this idea of this great ship, I kind of wanted to explore that. And I thought it was interesting that Robin said in the essay that she responded first in silence, and then these kind of poems came out, which I think it's really important sometimes to have silence, whatever that looks like in your life, and to kind of sit with some of these themes that get popped up. And sometimes it happens in this fermentation process. I know that I'm just now able to communicate certain subjects in my poems that I started writing when I was 20 years old, but now almost 14 years later, I'm just now really able to articulate #therapy. Thank you. But also, you know, I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that it takes a long time to have empathy for the people that have hurt you. And so I think that takes a while to kind of like ride that tension in your poems. And so when I got my MFA, I didn't see myself in the canon. So I started creating my own canon. And I started looking at ways of like where the personal and the political kind of intersect. And so today I kind of want to look at these different strategies within the poems that I've picked of how do we, sorry, I'm getting my notes together. Let me go back. So in my MFA, I didn't see myself, so I started creating my own canon, and I started looking at different poets that I saw that were kind of making and breaking forms, and I started kind of picking up different techniques of how do I center my body when I haven't seen it before? How do I talk about my pain on the page? How do I tell the story when I've often felt abandoned or marginalized by my family, by a community? And also looking at Audre Lorde's essay, which I love the title, "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House." That's another essay that kind of starts with this idea of absence, this idea of not seeing oneself in a space and demanding and creating a space for oneself. And so that's kind of the overarching theme today. And how we're going to do that is looking at how to answer these questions with some different types of language. So I think all poems have a system of patterns. So today we're going to look at what are these different patterns that we're kind of seeing, either that are set up and then disrupted. Also, we're going to look at kind of release and restraint, and also this idea of resonance. I think, to me, what I'm really thinking about lately with poems of what has resonance. And I think we can all define those in different ways, but to me, it's kind of like, what has that kind of deep, full, reverberating effect? Like, to me, those are the poems that you keep on thinking about after you read them, you know? And so certain poems that we're going to be looking at today, I want to kind of identify what is that idea of resonance. Also, I talk very fast, so if anytime you need me to slow down or say, slow down, girl. Also, I want this to be open. If you ever have any questions or you want to add, I'm going to have a couple of discussion points too. So please feel free to talk. The biggest kind of thing I want to talk about, I just got back from working with a week with Carl Phillips, an amazing poet. And he kind of describes this idea of grammatical mood. And so he kind of looks at the four kind of like structures of sentences. So declarative, you have your statements, interrogative, questions, imperative, commands, and the subjunctive, which he kind of says the subjunctive is, you know, what hasn't come to pass yet or what suggests possibility. So I kind of want to look at that be another kind of framework when we're looking at the poems today of grammatical mood, or how are questions working? How are these commands working in these types of poems that we're looking at? So hopefully we can answer some of these questions today. And also on your syllabus, I started with that Robert Duncan quote, which is one of my favorite quotes from one of his poems. And it ends, "Often I'm permitted to return to a meadow, as if it were a given property of the mind that certain bounds hold against chaos. That is the place of first permission, everlasting omen of what is." I have some thoughts about it, but I'd love to hear if someone has it, like, what did that quote mean to you in terms of kind of what this theme is today, and kind of thinking about what does it mean to have permission to go back to a meadow? What does the meadow kind of represent when we think about poems and the poems that we want to create on the page? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Don't be shy.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just like the kind of opening epigraph from Robert Duncan, that often I'm permitted to return to a meadow. What does that kind of mean? I mean, each of us could probably answer that differently. What does that mean to have permission to return to? What does the meadow represent? And what is that place of first permission?
I mean, when I think of meadow, the first thing that comes to mind is like Wuthering Heights and like sort of messy, like it's interesting that they said property of mind, because I think the meadow in that book and in many other books is so much a state of being. And for that to be then followed by certain bounds hold us against chaos, that like these kinds of landscapes are really just frameworks in which to go through our identity, our consciousness, and then to end with an everlasting omen being, you know, there are good omens, there are bad omens. So it's really what you want to make it. I think this kind of snippet from Duncan kind of lets you insert what is the omen, what is the meadow, so that you can kind of like be in balance with it. So
I think that's great, Natasha. And I love that you said that word landscapes, and that's exactly why I chose it. To me, the landscape for me kind of represents the landscape and the trauma of my past or of my present or my future, kind of thinking that omen can kind of be timelessness. And so in the poems today, I picked a lot of poems that actually are kind of smashing together a psychological self against a certain type of landscape. And it's really interesting because I don't really write a lot about nature in my work. When I do, it often becomes very violent and sexual, which some of these poems are. So I think that the landscape becomes a mirror in which we kind of like refract or reflect ourselves. And so, but I love this idea of like the place of first permission, but that meadow kind of holds us against chaos. And I think that's what kind of like holds us in poems. Another thing we'll be looking at today is like, what is the dead center of a poem? Sometimes I look at the center of a poem, to me that holds the center. And that's what's like holding the poem to me. They're kind of like spiraling off the end. So that Duncan quote always stays with me a little bit too. All right, so let's just kind of jump in. So we're going to start with this Linda Gregg poem, Ideology. Let me get my notes together. Do I have a volunteer, someone to read this poem, please? Not all at once. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Zoe.
Is it Ideology?
Yes.
So you said. Ideology. Cruelty made me. Cruelty and the sweet smelling earth and the wet scent of hay. The heave in the rumps of horses galloping. Heaven forbid that my body not perish with the rest. I have smelled the rotten wood after rain and watched maggots writhe on dead animals. I have lifted the dead owl while it was still warm. Heaven forbid that I should be saved.
Thank you. Great reading. So ideology, which I had to look up too. I had like heard it before. I've heard of it in forms of like disease, but just it's like how things begin, and particularly like the set of causes for a disease or a condition, but also the investigation of the cause or reason for something, often expressed in terms historical or mythical. So I kind of wanted to start off with just a simple writing exercise as we begin today. What made you? And kind of pick an abstraction. And just we'll spend like maybe just like 2 or 3 minutes, just get a couple lines down of just the idea of what made you, what kind of abstraction made you. Maybe finish up your line. 10 seconds. Also, I'm really big on if you're jamming, keep on jamming. So let's look at the patterns in this poem. What patterns do we see happening? I think one pattern we see kind of right away is that we kind of have this repetition already, this kind of anaphora of cruelty made me, and then cruelty in the sweet smelling earth. Another pattern that I see is associative leaping. So the progression of the poem moves from the association of images. So we get from cruelty to smell, so the sensory experience, earth and hay, and then hay, we get to horses. Horses, we get to heaven forbid that my body, heaven thinking about death and perish. And then I think it's really fascinating, there hasn't been an I this whole time. The lyric I is right in the dead center of the poem. I have smelled the rotten wood, which I thought was a really effective turn. It made me think almost like a volta and a sonnet. So we have the abstraction and the associative leaps, and then I have smelled the rotten wood after rain. And then we get another I have, the repetition doubles down again. And then heaven forbid that I should be saved. Does anyone else see any other patterns in the poem? I might have just said them all, but there might be one I might have missed.
There's also this just kind of connection between the heave, heaven, and I have. So there's this kind of sonic pattern in the kind of middle part of the poem that is kind of juicy.
Yeah, the music there is very, very similar and seems to kind of almost, there's an accretion of those sounds. So heaven, heave, I have, heaven. I mean, it almost goes down the whole middle of the page. Yeah, absolutely. Can I just hear everyone's first line if you feel comfortable just saying what made you?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Hey, Sally.
Hi. Language flinging itself against the glass like a fish.
Ooh, I like that. I like conflating that with the fish. It's great. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
A curtain of unicorn hair was dipped in a lake of shimmer. The wet song pulled along the moss and soil, and I was made.
That's gorgeous. I like that. I like that kind of longer line, and then we kind of get the resolution of that. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Next up. Don't be shy.
I'll go.
Okay.
Restlessness made me. Mom with one thumb between the pages of an endless book, her other hand on my father's back, edging, come forth.
You kind of already had the associative leaps there. That's really great. Kind of the thumb and then the hand and the back, like all this kind of like progression of the body. It's great. Next.
Yeah, I can go. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hand me down. I think my mother provided the vessel, but it was the contact of my older sibling, the contact of my older sibling's life that that's hand left its imprint on everything.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Also another hand image. That's great. And the family. Does anyone else feel like sharing, or shall I skedoodle along to making and breaking forms? Skedoodle? Okay. If anyone wants to share, just holler. Okay, so I want to look at this poem by Jennifer Chang called Whoso Lists to Hunt. Can I have someone to read it, please? Nobody? We all should love to read. Sally, you want to read?
I'll do it. I was just pulling it up. All right. Whoso lists to hunt. When there was such a thing as correspondence, landscape was a verb. Honor was a verb. 2. I wrote on a bus and saw the city park where a king once hunted deer. 3. Yes, I wrote. In a net I seek 10, hold the wind. 4. I live in history. 5. My wild English, a yellow blur of faces, a stranger's watercolors drying paper to brittleness. 6. Now my life consists of pronouns. 7. Where deer fringe the field, I stand with my hands out, another animal wanting to be free again. 8. There is a word for this, like a cobblestone dislodged from the thoroughfare. 9. Brittle page, history, what am I to you? 10. Thinking, is today's minor captivity. 11. From which I won't be rescued, this delicate trespass. 12. What is nature? 13. 14. Fainting I follow, I leave off therefore.
Thank you, Sally. So one of the questions I always ask myself is, I think every form is conducive for a type of thinking. And so sometimes I think, what is a sonnet? And oftentimes I think about the psychological mood of a sonnet, having that kind of like opening problem or opening battle cry. There has to be some kind of turn with the volta, some kind of shift in the argument. And then it's the battle's always seeking resolution by the end. And one of the ways I think that we can help center our bodies and get kind of the marginalized to the forefront is making and breaking forms. Or how do we take the old forms like the sonnet and make it fresh and push it forward? And I think Jennifer Chang is doing that here. To me, she's exploding the sonnet. I mean, it's even on the page, although the way I have it for you is a little bit janky, but in her book, I mean, still that spacing, or even to have the kind of the list out there like that, she's kind of like zooming out on the sonnet. And then we also have Whoso Lists to Hunt, which is from the Sir Thomas Wyatt, which I had the link for that, kind of calling back to that poem, but also pushing it forward. So going back to that idea of that Duncan poem of just like that permission to return to a meadow, to here I feel like Jennifer Chang is having permission to return to that poem and saying, yes, I love the Shakespeare sonnet, but this is how I'm interpreting it in my body in this political landscape right now. I mean, to have number 4 say, I live in history, what does that mean? And to have this idea too of number 7, where deer fringe the field, I stand with my hands out, another animal wanting to be free again. To me, I see this as like a self-questioning the body in a landscape where one may not feel, or one might feel hunted, or one might feel kind of not reconciled. And I love this idea landscape was a verb, and honor was a verb, and how that kind of hovers over the rest of the poem. One thing that I think is really interesting here, talking about grammatical mood of the interrogative, are where we have kind of the 2 questions in number 9 and number 12. Brittle page, history, what am I to you? Like questioning back kind of the canon to me. And then also number 12, like, what is nature? Which sounds so simple, but to me, when we get to that, to me, that's kind of where the turn is, or the volta is. It has a lot of resonance at that point. And then number 13, we get silence there. Oftentimes, I think I don't put enough silence in my work. I think it's kind of brave to have a silence there where you don't have to answer that question. I think some poems just offer questions that either cannot be reconciled, or when you think about a collection, I think some poems offer questions and some poems answer them. I kind of think about it in that way. And then I also think it's super daring that in number 14, that she ends it with a comma. Like, have you ever ended a poem in a comma? I've never done that. I want to now after seeing her do it. I mean, she's pulling it from the actual sonnet, but now it takes on this whole new meaning. Fainting I follow, I leave off therefore. And to end with a comma like that, I think is just a really interesting way to kind of end this poem. And it kind of becomes this open meditation that I think is like really, really fascinating to see. And also I think with the exploded nature of it, it's kind of these disparate pieces of a body in a landscape that I find really interesting. Because of time, I'm going to keep trucking forward, but if anyone wants to talk, just raise your hand or just jump on in. I want to look at this high boon from Evie Shockley. Beep, bop, boop. I got to find it first. Do I have another volunteer that wants to read this? Somebody new? I'll just call on people. Is it Sienna? Okay, can you read the high boon?
Yes, I can. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, I just had it. Here it is. High boon for parasitic pre-apocalyptic blues. On the nature walk at Tahoe, I learned everything the secret life of flora could teach me about creatures that don't know what to do with light besides admire and squander it. For instance, the snow plant is not white, but sings the hummingbirds its red siren song as soon as the snow recedes in spring. It wears no green slip or wrap, crimson from stem to stern. This barely plant skips photosynthesis, stalks pines, and steals sugar from their mycorrhizal web. Trickle-down symbiosis is no symbiosis at all. In their language, the Washoe called this squat, blunt, scarlet getter coyote penis. It doesn't just look like a dick. A small flame burns the snow away, keeps your eye off the subterranean subterfuge.
Thank you. Great reading. So for those that aren't familiar with the haibun, it's kind of this ancient form from Basho, from Japan. And usually we kind of combine prose and haiku, which you kind of see on the page. There's kind of like that dense chunk where you kind of have this prose poem. And then we have the distillation of the haiku here. And here, obviously, you see it's on a strict haiku, but again, we're pushing the form forward. But the idea of a chunk and a digression. And often it would be kind of like a travel diary, a travel journal. And so for here, what I think is really fascinating is that idea of resonance that I was talking about earlier, of how does this poem have resonance? You know, often when I first read it, I was like, I have no idea what the heck this poem was about. But when I kept reading it, it kept revealing itself to me. And especially with that sense of that kind of distillation at the end, the poem had a lot of resonance. Sometimes I feel like I have to spell everything out for my readers. And I think I call it like make it plain or say the damn thing. And sometimes there's a time and place for certain kind of poems. And then sometimes I think what happens when you kind of zoom out and then zoom hyper in and let an image stand for itself. A small flame burns the snows away, keeps your eye off the subterranean subterfuge. What happens when you kind of just let the poem in on this kind of distillation? And when you start reading the poem again and again, okay, so, you know, the speaker's in the landscape, and I just love this declaration. I learned everything the secret life of flora could teach me about the creatures, as if we can understand the world now by kind of zooming in and looking at these plants and what's happening here. But then we start reading it, and something that's kind of interesting here. There's kind of like this steel sugar stalks pine. This kind of seems kind of violent, kind of seems a little, or when we get to the trickle down, of course, I'm thinking about kind of trickle down economics. And so like kind of what's happening in the class system can happen in this like kind of like natural world. And how, I don't know much about the natural, maybe there's another kind of botanist in the group that can explain it a little bit more, but you can kind of get a sense from the language that, you know, it's kind of mirroring what's happening in our own society with economics. And then we kind of, what I think is interesting too, I know someone mentioned earlier about the music, we kind of have like coyote penis. It doesn't just look like a dick. There's really that cacophony. And then we get euphony. Look at all the assonance, and a small flame burns the snows away. Like even this, it just sounds different. So we don't have time now, but I really would, a prompt for both of the ones, is just try to maybe rethink the sonnet. And on your own time, either have the exploded sonnet like Jennifer Chang did, or think about Terrence Hayes' new sonnets. I think that's the sonnet for my past and future assassin, something like that. I'm messing it up a little bit. But to me, those are, I think I also want to interrogate what is a sonnet, what's the psychological mood of a sonnet, and what are the different ways that you can reinterpret it, and what's kind of, so to me, it's like that opening gesture, that turn, and that resolution. But what are some interesting ways to like bring it forward? And then to hear, I think Evie's doing it in a really interesting way. I mean, even from the title, we get a little bit of sense too. We get pre-apocalyptic blues, parasitic blues. But I'm interested in trying a haibun too, and like having maybe a prose poem and then a distillation at the end, like either ending in something that's kind of haiku-like as a way to kind of end the poem. I think that would be interesting. Oh, Jay, I just saw a question. Should I answer that now or later?
Yeah, this is in relationship to this poem.
Okay, yeah. What was the question? It popped up, but then it went away.
Oh, can you? There should be like a chat symbol somewhere on the side, two little like chat marks. I'm gonna read it, but just so you can see them as they come in. Anyways, but the question is.
Oh, okay.
You see it?
Yeah. How do you break out of ruts? Words you keep using, phrases, metaphors that you overuse. The poem made me want to stretch how I describe the smallest things. Oh, that's a great question.
Oh, this is also from Jamila. From Jamila. Sorry.
Oh, hi, Jamila. I constantly, I think if we're writers, we all love language, right? I'm assuming. And I am always just like, I feel like a scavenger, just like eating new words. And I'm constantly, every time I find a new word, I have to look it up. I like cannot move forward, and I kind of keep like a little word bank in my mind. So I think just like eating and digesting language, constantly reading gets my mind from turning. I think we all, so I have two ways to answer this question. Oh, I need to charge my computer. Hold on. One, I think you can either go maximal. Sometimes I feel as writers we're like, oh, I shouldn't do this. I always use this word but certain writers are known for their words. You know what I mean? Like possibility. We think of Emily Dickinson. Just like there's some writers that just like they're known for certain words. So sometimes I think when we try to change yourself, you know what I mean? Like I actually want to say like actually lean more into it. You know, or what if you had a poem where you actually said, you know what, I always use this word. Let me interrogate this word on the page and actually let me lean into why I use it. Why does my mind always kind of swerve in this direction? And then the other thing that I do, another thing is whenever you have a poem, let's say you're talking about, let's say in this poem, you're talking about plants. Did you think that word dick was going to come up? That was such a surprise to me. So sometimes I'll take all the words in a poem and then I'll try to create like their antonyms on an opposite page and then try to kind of spiral in those antonyms within the poem. I'm trying to think about the other tips. But yeah, I think playing around with form helps me kind of get out of my rut. So because I think knowing that you have to write that haiku, it's almost like, you know, like when you're bowling and you have like the little bumpers up. Like my mind kind of shifts off the form and it helps me kind of like create new language. Cause I'm like, okay, I need to do a haiku. I need to go to nature when I don't go to nature before, but what happens if I shifted my mind to this other landscape? Kind of what would happen there? Does that make sense? What I'm saying? What do you mean by psychological mood? I mean, so not necessarily sticking to a strict sonnet. So when I'm saying write a new sonnet, I'm not saying it even has to be 14 lines, but taking off what we psychologically feel from a sonnet. So in a sonnet, we're expecting that volta, we're expecting that turn, and then we're seeking some kind of Shakespearean resolution in that final couplet. But I'm not saying it has to be strict to the form, but stealing those movements. Does that make sense? That's what I mean by psychological mood of like kind of taking those beats that it's doing, but we don't necessarily have to stay so strict to the 14 lines or ABBA or ABA rhyme scheme, but kind of I'm interested in kind of taking what the form does psychologically, how it makes me feel. Because when you feel that swerve in a sonnet, that turn, woo, and that resolution, that feels really good. And so I'm interested in what are the ways that we can adopt those for poems. Is that clear? Okay, see lots of good head bobs. Okay. What's next? Oh, let's quickly look at this Lucille Clifton poem. Is today her birthday? Isn't today her birthday? Look at me. I'm so on top of it. I'm gonna dab for Lucille Clifton. Y'all forgive me for that. We don't have to read this poem, but I'm really interested is, if I can find it, is how this poem avoids closure. So look at the end. How does this poem end? Do the daughters quilt? Do the alchemists practice their tables? Do the worlds continue spinning away from each other forever? So I'm a poet talking about habits where I like to have sometimes like a mic drop ending, boom, I want to resolve all the threads that I brought up in a poem. But here, Lucille's like, no, baby, you don't have to close up. You can actually break the fourth wall. The reader becomes a part of the poem and it's choose your own adventure. I think that's really, really interesting. How does the poem end? Do the daughters quilt? Do the I mean, I think that's so surprising and so brave and interesting to do. And it makes me kind of want to read the poem again, which provide, again, that resonance, that sense of reverberation, to want to go back. So I think this poem was really, really fascinating because it starts somewhere in the unknown world and then somewhere other, the alchemist. So it's like the world of like the mothers and daughters quilting, the world of the scientist. And then we get to create kind of the world of the poem and like, how does the poem end? And I love that I love poems that break the fourth wall, I call it. Ross Gay has a really great poem called Feet. If you have catalog of unabashed gratitude, where he's talking about his friend's death. And then towards the end of the poem, he's like, do you really think I'm talking about my fucking feet? Her name was Tina. Of course she's dead. And you're like, you know, Lucille Clifton also said, why under this poem is there always another poem? Which is another thing I always carry with me when I'm writing, because it's like, what is the other thing that you're writing about? And so I wanted to kind of have an idea of another technique or strategy is what would it mean to avoid closure? You know, so we saw in Jennifer Chang's where she ended with that comma. We saw in that haibun, we end with a haiku, or the idea of a haiku, that distillation. And then here, what if you actually invited your readers into the poem and you actually question the idea of what does it mean to actually have closure, but again, it's that release and restraint. Do we get closure at the end of this poem? I think we could argue it. I don't know. Am I going too fast? Is everyone feeling okay? Because I'm just like, boop, 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 boop. Okay, got a good thumbs up. Okay, let's talk about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jay.
There was one question from Shira. What are some forms, not necessarily poetic forms, that you want to burst open in your writing?
Ooh. What are some other forms, not necessarily poetic forms, that you want to burst open in your writing? I'm not sure. What other poetic forms that, but not necessarily poetic forms, I think. What are some other forms? Does anyone else want to answer this? I'm still thinking. That's a great question. I'll throw it to the group. Sally?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the breast pump poem because I really loved it. And I think that, like, you know, one of the things that poem, along with its counterpart, talk about is kind of like using poetry, using language to like bust the body wide open.
Yeah.
And so, and you know, the question also made me think, like back when I was in college, I was in this workshop, and this other person in the workshop was saying that they had been in an art class and they had painted this still life of a tomato, and their teacher kind of came up and looked at this painting of the tomato and was like, all right, it's time to bust the tomato wide open. And kind of like thinking of that in terms of like, sometimes it's time to bust the tomato wide open in a poem too.
Yes.
So if maybe that can give you a way into the question, I'd be curious to hear your answer. What tomatoes are you trying to bust wide open in your writing?
Okay, Sally. That was amazing. You did help me, actually. Actually, there's a really good tomato busting poem in the latest poetry magazine by Victoria Chang called Obit. She has these new Obit poems. But there's like a really juicy tomato in there. Okay, you actually helped me. Actually, the thing I'm working on right now is this idea of long poems and busting up the idea of a long poem. I was listening to Commonplace by Rachel Zucker, which I highly recommend. It's a really great poetry podcast. And the one I highly recommend, there's a lot of them, but there's one with Roger Reeves and Natalie Diaz. And Roger talked about how in A Black Body, he found himself when he would like walk past a white woman, like in a doorway, he would like move out of the way and automatically. And he said that I saw myself doing that in my own work. Like I was like so mannered and precautious. And he was like, I really want to bust that idea in a long poem. And so I've been writing these long poems actually lately as a way to kind of like, I have a line in it, like, I am what the long poem says about me. And like, sometimes I feel in poems like we search for concision, and it's a way to be tidy. And I'm actually interested in busting that idea open of just like having a poem be as long as I want it to be, say all that I have to say, to exhaust everything I want to say, and not be ashamed of what I have to say or the space that I need to make or make up. And that's been very, very radical for me. So even the idea of a long poem as a way for me to honestly decenter and declare my body. And I've been looking at my body as a voyage and as a ship. And what does it mean to kind of take a longer voyage on the page and not be afraid of like, oh, no, a reader's not going to want to sustain over 10 or 15 pages. So, ooh, these are great. So was there another question, Jay, or that was good?
That was cool. The artistic and cultural was just Shira's additional like insight to her question about what forms. But you answered it. You're good. You're good.
Okay, with the culture, yeah. Okay, cool beans. I love that question though. The ones I can't answer are always the ones that haunt me, and then like I end up writing several poems to it later. But definitely the idea, I've been questioning the idea of the long poem. But I think it's a really good question. Again, going back to the idea of habits, or like often I think whatever you're afraid of or you're steering against, or like that kind of like, you know, lean into that. Because I'm honestly, the hardest thing you can do, but the most bravest thing you can do, I think, is just try to be more of yourself every day. And I'm trying to, what is, for me, I'm asking myself, what does that look like on the page? How do I be more of myself on the page? Because that's how you fall in love with people. It's through their idiosyncrasies. It's not through, to me, like, I don't fall in love with highly curated people that are buttoned up. Like, I fall in love with people that are messy, because we're messy. And so I want actually wanting my poems to be messier, not so curated. I want to have freedom. I want to show freedom in my work. And I want people to feel freedom when they read my work. So that's, again, that double sound idea, that psychological mood. I want people to feel like they can rip their shirt off and run around, have some revival. Speaking of revival, let's look at this Vanessa poem. Did everyone watch the video? What did you think? What was that experience? I'm really interested to hear what that experience like from a couple people of kind of, I think that poem was so powerful to see her body working out and to have the kind of like interspersed text messages. So that's kind of my two questions of what was it like to watch it, and what is it like to have your body kind of centered in a visual space and thinking of the body in the context of the poem, and then also to kind of like weave in text messages. What was that effect like for you kind of psychologically as you watched it?
For me, it just felt really brave. I mean, that was probably my favorite of the batch, and I thought about how she, you know, in writing this, you're always like, when you're writing, you're always thinking about, you know, who you might hurt and who, like, what experiences you can bring in without like never talking to your mom again, you know. And in this piece and this video, I mean, that's just so much vulnerability that, like, yeah. I mean, talk about, you know, exhausting a long poem and taking up the space you need to take up, you know, she did it.
Yeah, and I actually liked in the video how she took pauses and we saw her like dripping with sweat, and like there was a lot of oral silence that we didn't get necessarily on the page that I thought was like really, really effective. Yeah. It also, you said something that made me think about the people that we hurt in our poems. And I just want to pass this little nugget on to y'all. I often write about people who have hurt me. And I used to kind of like not publish the work until Natalie Diaz visited Vanderbilt. That's where I got my MFA. And I asked her, I was like, so you wrote this poem, you know, or the book when my brother was an Aztec about, you know, it's the speaker's brother who has a meth addiction. I was like, what was that like for your family? And she said something that blew up my world. She was like, as women and as women of color, we keep the pain domestic and we keep it in the kitchen. And it's another form of erasure. It's another form of violence. She said, no one owns your story except for you. And I said, all right. I was like, I'm going to send all these poems out. And I was like, no one owns the stories for me. Now I'd like to say that everything's been peaceful with my family. Kind of hasn't, but I feel like they really know who I am now. Anyone else have some thoughts about the exercise in the face of divorce? I thought it was really interesting in there how, again, the speaker kind of goes to a type of landscape. Every road, every mountain, every river promised you for a lifetime. The land ends here. Like, what does it mean for a landscape to end here? And that's a reflection of the relationship that's kind of breaking down in divorce. And then I love how the poem kind of ends in negation. This line, I will no longer be sorry this body grew heavy with labor. And kind of thinking about Kendra's poem later of just like the abundance of the body and breaking up the idea of the body. And like, she's going through kind of like this horrible divorce, these horrible messages that this partner sent that were heinous. And then like not apologizing for it. I will no longer be sorry this body grew heavy with labor. I love that line. And that's another idea I wanted to absorb into my work. What are ways that I can stop apologizing for living and being and breathing in this body? And how can I show that on the page? I thought that was like a really, really interesting line. And I also love this line, everything is trying to kill me and I have to survive you. And then when we get to that point, you almost think she's not even talking about this man anymore. It's like all of the world. I mean, I feel that way kind of in my existence in this body, but everything is trying to kill me. I don't know, I thought that was really powerful. And just, again, this new ideas of how are we breaking up this idea of poetic form. And I thought having that video poem, and I think people are absorbing poetry in different mediums now that we have this, I think we're in this digital renaissance now. And so I'm constantly thinking of what are some new ways for other people to experience kind of our work in different mediums. And I thought that was a really, really powerful way to do that, especially centering her body to the forefront in a very vulnerable space, like you said, Zoe. Anyone else have any thoughts about it?
I also think just like using the mental space of like the body while it's working out is a very like fragile and vulnerable place that everyone kind of makes their own. So like to like watch the video and read the poem at the same time, it's almost like each thing becomes like the mantra you say to yourself as you work out, like in order to like physically keep going. So it made this like crazy feeling in my body of like I've been there. But then to say the more violent things like your workhorse, your punching bag, it really just like takes you through the ringer of what you think when you're working out half the time.
No, that's great. This idea, I've been thinking about the poetics of persistence lately, and so that idea of like what are the messages that we have to say to ourselves, and I think repetition has a lot to do with that. Let's switch to this interrogation of the hangman. I think this is a really wild, weird poem. And what I want to do is a little bit different. So I think this poem is interesting in how it's dealing with questions in a work. And so what I want to do is I want to actually read the poem, but I want you to answer the questions in whatever surreal, wild way that you want to. So I'm going to read the poem, but I'm going to leave pauses because I want you to answer it however you want to answer it. Another thing that Yoon did here that I thought was interesting, I don't know if you noticed, but she answers all of the questions in 4 syllables. So you think it's this wild, weird poem, but it actually has a lot of control. So it's a house of sorts, a chipstone blade, which I think is really, really fascinating. So I'm gonna read the poem, but again, I want you to answer the questions. Everyone got it? Thumbs up? Okay, cool. Interrogation of the hangman. What is your face? What is your foot? What did you dream? What did it mean? What have you learned? What does it forgive? What do you want? No, what do you want? What's in your hand? No, show me. What's that in your hand? I'll give y'all like 1 more minute to go back over maybe some of your answers. To have a courageous and brave person who I'll read the questions again, but they'll say their answers. Raise your hand. Anybody? Bueller? Nobody? I know it's vulnerable. Yay, Sienna. Yeah, let's do it.
I just wanted to make sure no one else wanted the opportunity because I already read one time.
Okay. What is your face?
A flower petal rotting.
What is your foot?
Grasshoppers woven out of metal.
What did you dream?
Of everything dipped in blue and ill.
What did it mean?
I don't know how to wake up smiling.
What have you learned?
Dirt knows everything on purpose.
What does it forgive?
All of me.
What do you want?
Shining time.
No, what do you want?
A bowl of sweet dates, cantaloupe, cream, honey.
What's in your hand?
Paper and pen.
No, show me. What's that in your hand?
The fuzz from a field full of deceased dandelions.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Can we get some snaps for Sienna sharing? Woo!
That was amazing. That was amazing.
That was gorgeous. Thank you so much for sharing. What was that experience like to have just kind of the litany of questions and that sense of interrogation, kind of for anybody to answer?
Someone actually has a question about the interrogation that I want to share with you that I think could help this conversation. Yeah. I'm gonna copy it real quick so everyone can read it. Sorry, my dog's also barking.
That's okay.
Okay, so this question from Marisha says, interrogation makes me think of the practice of asking questions in poetry. You spoke a bit on leaving things unresolved in poetry, answers that create more questions. What do you feel occurs in this dialogue between reader and the poet, and between the speaker of the poem and the subject? What must be communicated?
It's a really great question. Let me read it one more time to myself. What do you feel occurs in this dialogue? So I think a couple interesting things happen. That's a really great question. I often think of the kind of tradition of call and response.
Yeah.
Or of work songs and field songs. And again, going back to that kind of like the poetry and politics of persistence. And to me, there's a cadence and the rhythm with call. I think every day we're kind of in some type of call and response. And what's interesting here is that we don't really know who's speaking. I think you could take the title either way. So it's either the hanged man is answering these questions, or the hanged man could be asking these questions. To me, these kind of seem like disembodied voices. And also this person is resisting the question. So to me, there's all this sense of resistance. You know, these are kind of non-answers, so it seems at first, but yet each one is just kind of, to me, each line has that idea of resonance. Like each one, I'm kind of like each jet, its wake, I think is something that's kind of like stayed with me ever since I've read this poem. And then I look at the poem and where it breaks the pattern, because we have what, and then no, what do you want? As if the voice is getting kind of not satisfied and wanting to know more. And then again, no, show me. And then also like, what's in your hand? So for me, again, I'm talking about psychological mood. I don't know exactly what's happening between the questions and answers, but it is, for me, it's as if the idea of questioning someone who's resisting you is something that I feel I've known in my body. I feel in my body as though like I've often kind of, questions have been pushed on me that I don't know how to answer in certain spaces. So kind of the idea of that resistance feels to me what needs to be communicated, if that makes sense. And that's just how I read the poem. I think this poem is kind of really wide open. And this idea that this other voice is not satisfied with the answers. Being married for 10 years, that feels makes a lot of sense to me. That was supposed to be a joke, but I don't know. How does someone else kind of interpret this poem? Does anyone else have any thoughts? Sally, did you have a thought?
I did, but I feel like I've been talking a lot, so
it's okay.
I kind of wanted to hang back.
Okay. I say feel the freedom. Go ahead.
The last question really, it hit me differently hearing it out loud with all of that silence in between. And there were kind of, you know, like, there was so much, like, there was so much danger in those last two questions. You know, like, what's that in your hand? Like, you know, all of the, like, things that police have, you know, said they thought in the moment were a weapon, like, is what it made me think of. But also, like, you know, like, you see your kid and they're like, you know, they got something that they're about to put in their mouth, and you're like, wait a second, like, what is that? And like, you know, like, I like the repeated questions, like the way that those build tension in the poem is so, like, it's so effective. So that's just what it made me think about.
Yeah, I mean, something becomes at stake there, because there could be a type of punishment that happens, especially with the title, kind of really foregrounds and really frames this poem of. But it's also interesting because it's past tense of the hangman. It's as though he's already died too. So Monica Yoon's doing lots of things with their brains here, but yet we're still getting all these types of interpretations. And I think kind of thinking about police brutality is a really interesting kind of filter. And it's also interesting, again, we've been talking about landscape. What does the voice say? A leafless twig, something kind of harmless, but it's also plucked, you know, it's kind of bare. So I think that's really fascinating. Anybody else have any thoughts about the poem? I think that's great, Sally. Thanks for sharing. All right, let's move along to kind of pleasure and joy in a painful body. So I just love this Robin Cost Lewis poem, and we don't have to talk about it much, but I just love this idea of this declarative sentence: pleasure is black. That has like haunted me ever since I've read this poem several months ago. And this idea, we've been talking again about landscape, about the body. The title is landscape. But I also I'm still working through the poem. So pleasure is black, and I no longer imagine where my body stops or begins. So here the body becomes infinite. Skin transparent, face speckled by the spit of several centuries. All the borders stare at the same fires. Oh, Mimir, I'm sorry, here I am. And I looked up Oh, Mimir, I think it's like my mother, oh, my mother. I'm sorry. It's interesting. These poems kind of have a lot of similarities, as though there's kind of like this action that takes place off stage, you know, the poem. But I get this sense from all the borders stare at the same fires. Another sense, I get that, what Sally was talking about, that sense of danger that's kind of like happening around a landscape. But I just love that declarative boom of pleasure is. And I would love if y'all would just maybe like, what is like one word for you? When I say pleasure is, what's your one word? Pleasure is what for you? Maybe just write it down. Pleasure is what? I've been writing so much about grief lately in my newest book that I'm really interested in joy now, and like how do we talk about grief and gratitude in one poem together. So I'm really interested. Pleasure is, because so often pleasure isn't described as Black. So already from the jump, Robin Cost Lewis kind of has us by her throat. Does anyone want to share their one pleasure, please? Please. For
Water.
my people. Huh?
Water.
Water. Love it. Next.
Surprise.
Ooh. I like that.
Forgiveness.
Yeah.
Messy.
Messy. That's great.
Freedom.
Freedom. Oh, I love that. Yep. Anybody else?
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
I had pleasure is privilege.
Privilege. Ooh. That's good. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. That's real. Anybody else want to share? Well, I hope you go back to those poems. That'd be a great poem to kind of chase and see what happens. So I just love this poem from Kendra DeColo, I Pump Milk Like a Boss. I don't know if we have time to read it, but I just first of all, I love that she uses glop glop. What a great onomatopoeia. One thing I really liked about this poem is pleasure and pain in the body. Like, I haven't breastfed before, but for my friends, it's kind of a painful experience. But there's like pain and joy in this. It almost seemed like an ode to me, where it has the three movements of like the strophe, antistrophe, and epod or epode, where it kind of presents like, here's the problem, here's the turn. Like, she's in this bathroom with this woman like saying this sexy poem in her ear, and she's just trying to breastfeed, and then it's joy, and then it ends in so much. I love that line, a little bit in love with the abundance of my body. So what I want you all to do is I want you to draw your body. It could be like really rough. It can be like a gingerbread person, but draw your body. I mean, it could be like, I don't know if you can see that. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to get detailed here, but I just want you to draw your body. Very rough outline. And what I want you to do for a couple minutes is maybe indicate where you have a fraught relationship with certain parts of your body, where you have a fraught relationship, or where is there pain in your body? Maybe you kind of exit or mark it, and just kind of like circle or mark just where you have a fraught relationship, where's there pain, maybe there's some scars, physical scars, and just spend a few moments kind of thinking about that. Okay. Obviously, this can be a little bit difficult. Thinking about Kendra's poem and this idea of a little bit in love with the abundance of my body. I want you to write a love poem or an ode celebrating that idea of pick one of the features that you kind of, anything that kind of like really vibrated for you a little bit. You kind of felt a little like, ooh, I've been meaning to write about that for a while, but I haven't gotten around to it. Or maybe something that really kind of like got kind of sticky for you. And maybe just add this idea of like, I love this like swagger. I pump milk like a boss. And so just bring that swagger and joy. And even if you don't feel it, like what would happen if you tried to kind of add it into a poem with this idea of something that you have a fraught relationship with some part of your body that experiences pain? Like, how do you smash the joy and pain together? And this kind of like joyful smorgasbord that kind of Kendra's doing here. I mean, this line's like, you know, the infrared honey, the glop glop, the afterbirth dripping down my left leg, spittle and amen. There's like this like holy and profane all together. Like, how do you kind of create? So I just spent a couple of moments of just like, oh, bye, Sally. Thank you so much. Sorry, I ran a little bit over.
Whoever that is with their kid, I want to be friends with you.
Oh, I don't know. Did they hear you?
I don't know if they did.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you. Sorry, we ran a little bit over, but thank you for joining us. Loved hearing your thoughts. So maybe we'll spend a few minutes just writing this, and then we'll kind of wrap up because I know we were running a little bit over.
We're doing just fine on time.
Okay. We are, okay. Maybe one more minute. You may finish your last word or sentence. I know this is a very vulnerable one, but just one courageous, we're all courageous, but does anyone feel like sharing what they wrote? Elizabeth, I saw you be like, nope. You were like, nope. Or just a couple lines. You don't have to read the whole thing. Or if you just want to talk about what it was like to kind of indicate a certain part of your body and then write about it with adding joy. Was that hard? Was that difficult? Why was it difficult? Do you want to keep pushing for that? What does it mean to kind of write about your body? And I'd look at bodies as poems that remind us we have bodies. So to me, it becomes this really interesting experience of kind of like a somatic experience. So no one wrote that down. That's a good line. Poems are bodies that remind us we have bodies. That's a good one-liner. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay. Does anyone want to share a couple lines or just what that experience was like? I'd love to hear.
Someone wants me to read theirs. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Trish, if you want to share yours, please do. I'm sorry, it's coming in now. Okay. Sorry, let me open it up. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, it's loading. So this is from Trish Hopkinson.
Oh, I know Trish. Hi, Trish.
Cool. Great.
So glad you're here.
My stretch marks jiggle like the best red-eye gravy. Remind me how my body has made other bodies, how mystifying it is to feel another moving in my abdomen, the pinch of a foot pressing against a rib, over and over until I push and try to rearrange. The stubborn, wiggly little infant, those soft memories of listening close to the stethoscope, the flump of a second heartbeat.
Oh my gosh, that was so good. I love the flump. I like how the glop got reinterpreted. I love the line how my body made other bodies, or I might have gotten that wrong. But
yeah. That was it.
And how the stretch marks just kind of like glisten and shine and just like, yes, I felt that. That's so gorgeous and powerful. I think it's just like very, I don't know, I feel a lot of like vibration of just like, I don't know. It's very like anti-shame. That was gorgeous. Thank you, Trish, for sharing that. That's gorgeous. I hope you keep chasing that poem.
Trish says thank you, by the way.
Yay. Flump.
Flump for me too.
I love that. It's like FLUMP.
Yep.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Anybody else? No. Okay, well, can one person talk about the process? Is it Julie? And start calling people out. Oh, hi. You want to share?
I didn't get very far. I think I don't know it.
Or what was the process like for you? You don't have to read the poem.
The process, I think, it felt really vulnerable even to myself, even as like a private thing. Even if I wasn't going to share it, it felt like it was opening something in me. And I don't know, I really like the idea, that concept of like bringing swagger to our scars.
Okay, I gotta write that down.
Definitely something I want to keep exploring.
Thank you for sharing. I'm ready. That's gonna be a great workshop title. Bringing swagger to my scars. Woo! I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Did anyone else want to share? Dee, did you want to share something?
Oh, I was just gonna talk about how difficult it was for me, because I thought about my mind, and just like battling with different mental, just the mental health in general. And it was hard. Like it was very, very hard to kind of swag it out, since it's been something that's kind of like been like a heavy blanket over me. And so I'm working on it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I also have had a mental health journey, and it's something that I was wanting to show with different poems today of how to kind of explicitly and also implicitly deal with heavier themes and issues. And one thing, I ended your packet with this quote from Ralph Ellison, where he talks about the blues as an impulse to keep the painful details and episodes of a brutal experience alive in one's aching consciousness, to finger its jagged grain, and to transcend it. See, that's where that quote, I love that quote, because it's one thing to talk about your pain, to write about your pain, but what does it mean to transcend it? Is that possible? I don't know. Haven't been there yet, but I yearn for that and I reach for that in my work. So I feel like adding that, whatever that idea of swagger is, it's my hope that I'm reaching towards some kind of transcendence in that. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you all for being vulnerable with me on and off the page. It's the kind of writers I love to read and write about. And we won't go into it deeply, but just kind of, we started with what made you, and I wanted to kind of end where we began with thinking about making our own myths and creation stories. So this poem from Melissa Border and Denise Smith, Melissa's poem, Lunar Shadows, and this idea of what would it be like to create your own myth about yourself. And I love how gender is talked about in both of these poems and how they're conflated and deconstructed and broken down and brought back to life. I just love the repetition and incantation of Melissa's poem. And this idea of, I just love how this poem ends of just like, how they do not need to turn to Pegasus. They are winged and they're unmyth. They holy up the ground. I must holy up the ground. I sanctify the ground and say, fuck it. I say, fuck it in a way that does not invite death. I say, fuck it and fall down. No new holes. And I ride an unwinged horse and I unbecome myself. And I strip my poison suit and wear my crown of fuckets. So the idea of that swagger to my scars, I think that's kind of that incantation of that. And then also, I hope you all had the chance to listen to Dinese's poem. That's so powerful. And if you don't have their book, Don't Call Us Dead, I highly recommend it. But that turn of the him at the end, the not him for her, I thought was really, really powerful. And that sin begat a new joy. And so that's what I just want to end with, joy and gladness. And thank you all for your time and your attention. And I hope that you had some new drafts of poems or just thinking about poems in some interesting way today, and that this was good time shared. I enjoyed my time with you, and I'm here for, if you have any questions about anything, I'm happy to talk about anything, but I thank you all for your time. If you have to go, I understand, but I'm happy to stay around for questions.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Zoe.
That was awesome.
Yay, thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Tiana.
Oh, you're welcome, Julie. I appreciate it.
So actually, can people email you if they have questions?
Yeah, absolutely. My email is just tianaclarkpoet@gmail.com. Very original. Just tianaclarkpoet@gmail.com. Please email me. I'm also like on Twitter and all the things, so I'm around. But yeah, feel free if you want to show me any of the poems that developed today, or any questions. I'm happy. I will say I'm not like the fastest at email, but I will respond to you.
That's great.
You probably, honestly, if you hit me up on Twitter DM, I'll answer you faster, to be honest.
True.
Keep it real.
True. If we're gonna be real, true. True statement. No, but thank you so much for this time and holding space for us, and also like walking through all that very like tenuous stuff, not just for yourself, but for us and for the work. It was super appreciated. Thank you for answering all the questions you did, and really just like holding yourself and so tenderly. Again, thank you for saying your email. I'll add it to the group, and the people who are watching later want to shoot you a question or shoot you what they drafted after watching. That'll be great. But no, thank you all for being here, being super vulnerable for those who are in this room right here and had to read, had to like engage. Y'all are amazing. Thank you all for being here, stepping up and showing out. We appreciate it. And yeah, this can conclude this seminar. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you all. Love you, Jay. Love you all.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.